Keith Lash was born on July 7, 1987 in Fort Wayne, Indiana to parents April and Brian. In 2017, 29-year-old Brian was living with his 25-year-old girlfriend, Noelle Renee Trice, in Fort Wayne along with their 2-year-old son. Brian also had 2 daughters from a previous relationship. On Friday night, June 7, 2017, they had 6 friends over to watch the NBA Finals between Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors. A few people had also stopped by to buy some marijuana from Noelle. The following day, Noelle and Brian failed to show up for a planned meetup at the New Haven Canal Days, and they were oddly not answering their phones. Concerned, a female friend and her mother went by their house and shockingly found both Brian and Noelle dead inside. They had been stabbed to death and there was blood all over the home. Thankfully, Noelle's mother, Kimberly Gomez, took their son with her that night so they could continue watching the game and having fun. Unbeknownst to the friend and her mother, they hadn't even been dead for an hour. Investigators, with the help of family friends, determined that a 50-inch TV, 3 pounds of marijuana, and a VCR were missing. As for Noelle's cell phone, it was found in the hallway between the kitchen and the bedroom, and investigators were able to pull a partial palm print from it. One immediate person of interest was Dustin Neal, who had been at the house the night before. Dustin was brought in for an interview and didn't say much. However, a follow-up interview was conducted, and this time, he told investigators he had known Noelle for about 20 years and was at her home on an almost daily basis. He also admitted that he was aware she had 2 to 3 pounds of high-grade marijuana in her house that night. He said he left around midnight, the same time Noelle's mother left, and never returned. After leaving, he said he went to his mother's house and then to a friend's trailer that he had a key to. Once there, he smoked and had some drinks. The owner of the trailer came home at 3 a.m. after getting off work and confirmed that Neal was there. He then claims he left sometime between 7 and 9 a.m. However, a witness came forward and said that Dustin called twice, a little after 8 a.m., in a frantic state of mind. Call logs back this up. Dustin called the witness to try and sell a large amount of marijuana and said he needed to get rid of it quickly because he had stolen it from a couple. The witness said it was 1 to 2 pounds of high-grade marijuana, just like Noelle had. Investigators then obtained Dustin's cell phone records and found it pinged off a cell tower at 6:20 a.m. right near the victim's home. This proved, for one, that he had left the trailer way before 7 a.m. as he originally said. They then checked his palm print against the one found on Noelle's phone, and it was a match. However, it was Dustin who sealed his own fate. A new witness came forward and told investigators that he actually bragged about committing the murders. He even thought it was funny that he got the knife stuck while attacking Noelle and had to use his foot to get it out. Then another witness asked him if he was responsible for the murders, to which he responded, and I quote, "We're not going to talk about that." He then quickly followed that up with, and I quote, "I have 5 bodies under me." In July 2022, investigators learned that Dustin entered the home through a window, and once inside, he accidentally woke Brian up. That's when he stabbed him. After Brian and Noelle were dead, he allegedly burned his clothes and buried them in a backyard somewhere. Finally, in January of 2023, Dustin was arrested and charged with their murders. In 2024, he was found guilty and sentenced to 142 years in prison. John Freeman Stagner was born on April 21, 1939. By 1992, 53-year-old John was married to Donna, living in Orange County, Florida, and working as a county maintenance worker. Their home was on the county's maintenance property, and he served as the live-in caretaker for the equipment there. Those who knew John described him as a very generous person who treated others with kindness. On the evening of August 9, 1992, John was called out to repair a power line that had come down during a storm. They slept in separate bedrooms in the summer because Donna preferred to sleep with the air conditioning and John didn't. So when he came home, Donna went off to her bedroom around 10:30 while he stayed up watching TV in the living room. She heard a noise around 2:30 a.m. but never got up to check. Around 5 a.m., she went to wake him up but didn't turn on the light, and noticed that his arm was cold to the touch. Concerned, she turned the light on and shockingly found him dead. An autopsy determined he had been brutally attacked and suffered blunt force trauma to his head and face. Even though DNA was in its early stages, investigators knew the importance of it and collected as much evidence as they could. They also found a walking stick at the scene, which they determined was the murder weapon. Clearly, someone had come into their home and attacked John while he slept. However, there was no evidence of a struggle or a break-in. But they did find his window open, and since the house was only one story, they figured the suspect entered that way. Since nothing was missing and John was the only victim, they weren't sure what the motive was. They began going through his life trying to find anyone who might have had a reason to harm John. That's when they came across his friend Ronald Cates, who went by Ronnie. Ronnie was known for borrowing tools from John, and he was asked to return those tools not long before the murder. While they had fingerprints in the home that matched Ronnie, he was a frequent visitor, so they couldn't be certain he was their suspect. Ronnie and his family had even been homeless at one point, so John and Donna gave them a place to stay along with money and food. Strangely, when they went to talk to him, his daughter answered the door and seemed nervous and told investigators he was at home. They decided to stick around and eventually noticed a truck peel out of the driveway. They returned to the house and the daughter admitted her father forced her to lie about him being home. When they finally tracked him down and brought him in for questioning, he gave several conflicting statements regarding his whereabouts on the night John was murdered. Plus, they felt that an innocent man wouldn't try and evade police. 3 years after John's murder, Ronnie tried to take his own life and was committed during a mental health crisis. While in the hospital, he confessed to killing a man in 1992 but also claimed to have killed several historical figures. Since he wasn't mentally stable, the confession wasn't enough to arrest him. The case would then go unsolved for another 27 years. In April 2022, Ronnie was in a hospital in North Carolina and confessed once again to a nurse that he had killed someone in Florida in 1992. He also told a security guard the same thing. Curiosity got the best of them and they decided to research the murder he was talking about and stumbled on John's case. They then notified the police who came and interviewed him. Investigators learned that Ronnie had a drug problem and would sell the tools he borrowed from John for drug money. After he failed to return the tools, John had a fallen out. Frustrated that he couldn't get his tools back, he confronted Ronnie. They also learned that, on the day of the murder, Ronnie was hiding under the house, waiting for his opportunity to strike. At that point, they had him extradited back to Florida, where he was hospitalized for a mental evaluation and finally charged with first-degree murder. Once he was arrested, his family, now safe from him, decided to finally reveal information they had kept secret all these years. His wife said that he was a very violent man who had abused drugs for years. She also said back in 1992 that she was the only one bringing in money to the home because of Ronnie's drug abuse. While the kindness of the Stagner family was not lost on her and she desperately wanted the case to be solved, she was terrified of her husband. She always believed her husband murdered John and said that the night it occurred, he didn't return home until the early morning hours. When he finally showed up, to her shock, his clothes were all covered in blood. They also interviewed his adult children, and one of them said they remembered him asking her to hide a bunch of his clothes under the house. Days later, she was asked to go get them, and then he burned them. Ronnie has since provided investigators with several details, including how he murdered John. I wasn't able to find out if he's been sentenced yet, but it's possible he's in a mental facility. Larry Gosser was born in Somerset, Kentucky on April 14, 1951. Larry went on to become a sergeant with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife. By the spring of 2024, he was a retired father of 5, living with his wife, 50-year-old Angela, who went by Angie, in Russell Springs, Kentucky. Larry was described as a kind man who was always very friendly to others. He and Angie were enjoying the country life, but she unfortunately suffered from mental health issues and had stopped taking her medicine. This would ultimately lead to a horrible tragedy. Before we dive into that, we have to go back to 2009 when Angie's mental health really took a toll on her family. That year, Angie and Larry began going through a divorce due to her mental health issues. Larry also filed an order seeking emergency custody of their 14-year-old son. Unfortunately, Angie also had a history of abusing prescription medications and had been hospitalized after she threatened to take her life on multiple occasions. During the divorce proceedings, Larry accused her of throwing parties at the house and allowing underage children to drink. Their teenage daughter, Amanda, also got dragged into this mess after Angie threatened her not to say anything about the things she had done. She even sent her daughter text messages calling her a bitch and saying she would stomp her ass. With no other options, Amanda took out a protective order against her mother. In the custody case, the judge ultimately sided with Larry, but by 2010, the two had reconciled and they slowly became a family again. However, in 2024, her mental health issues would rear their ugly head again, but this time 3 people would be dead. On Friday, May 3rd, 2024, at 6:30 p.m., Larry was found in the front yard of their home, shot to death by Angie. After that, Angie began driving to her brother Daryl's house, but while on the way, she spotted her sister, Jennifer. She began chasing Jennifer and fired multiple shots through Jennifer's passenger side door, killing her instantly. Once she arrived at Daryl's house, she shot him twice, but he was able to defend himself and returned fire, killing her. Thankfully, Daryl survived the gunshot wounds. In the end, Daryl's actions were ruled self-defense and he was not charged with the crime. But now the family is left to pick up the pieces of losing 3 loved ones. Carol Lewis Valenzuela was born in Minnesota on December 30th, 1955 to parents William and Barbara. By the summer of 1974, 18-year-old Carol was married to Robert Eugene Valenzuela and living in Comas, Washington with their 10-month-old twins. On August 2nd, Carol decided to hitchhike the 15 miles to Vancouver, Washington. Sadly, Robert and her twins would never see her alive again. 2 days later, when she failed to return, he reported her missing. On October 12, 1974, a group of hunters stumbled upon 2 sets of remains in a densely wooded area of Dole Valley near Vancouver. The first victim was quickly identified as Carol. They went to question Robert, but he had unfortunately overdosed on aspirin and was in the hospital recovering. After recovering, he was arrested, but eventually was released after passing a polygraph test. The other remains discovered would then go unidentified for the next 41 years. The Jane Doe was estimated to be around 20 to 25 years old and had been dead for around 2 weeks. Unfortunately, due to the decomposition, they were unable to determine a cause of death. A reconstruction of her was created and published in newspapers, but it never led to her identification. In 1977, after being unable to identify her, the remains were archived. The remains went missing until 2011, when the operations manager at the Clark County Medical Examiner's office discovered the bones had been mislabeled as belonging to Carol. In 2012, after finding the bones, a DNA profile was developed and they were finally able to identify her as 17-year-old Martha Marie Morrison. Martha was born in the 1950s in Eugene, Oregon, and grew up in foster care. Unfortunately, she began using drugs and running away from home. She also kept in touch with her biological family. At some point, she left to join the Job Corps program in Arizona. There, she met a man and they rented an apartment together. She even brought this man back to Eugene at some point to meet her family. On September 1st, 1974, 6 weeks before her body was found, she strangely disappeared. It was reported that she and her boyfriend had gotten to a nasty argument right before she went missing. Investigators wanted to question him, but they had no clue who he was. So in 2016, they made an appeal to the public for help in identifying him. Not because he was a suspect, but in hopes he could shed some light on the case. Finally, in 2017, they got the break they were looking for when Martha's DNA was found on an air pistol that serial killer Warren Forrest used to torture 20-year-old Krista K. Blake. Forrest had been a long-time suspect in the case, along with a couple of other serial killers. As for the air gun, it was found in a footlocker in his van in October 1974 when he was arrested for the murder of Krista. In 1978, he was found guilty of Krista's murder and sentenced to life in prison. In January 2020, Forrest was charged with Martha's murder. Norma Lewis, a victim of Forrest who survived, testified during the trial that he offered her a ride home but instead drove her into the woods of Tukes Mountain, where he tried to kill her. Thankfully, she was able to escape and led the police back to the scene of the crime. When investigators scoured the area, they found Krista's body buried in a shallow grave less than 200 feet away. It's believed that his first victim was Jamie Rochelle Grissom, who disappeared after leaving school in 1971. Her ID was later discovered along a remote road in Clark County. To this day, she has never been found. He's also a suspect in the 1974 disappearance of Diane Gilchrist. In February 2023, Forrest was found guilty of Martha's murder. Investigators believe Forrest is responsible for the deaths of at least 7 women, and family members are hoping one day he will reveal the location of his other victims. While he hasn't been convicted for the murder of Carol, he is considered the prime suspect. On January 29, 2010, in Clarksville, Tennessee, David Champagne accidentally hit the mailbox of William Campbell, who went by Bill, and his wife Ina. He tried to call and let them know, but they strangely didn't answer. Concerned, he reached out to a neighbor who had a key to their house, and upon entering, they shockingly found them shot to death in their bed. The house had also been ransacked, appearing like the murders were the result of a burglary gone wrong. Bill and Ina had been married for many years and adopted a baby boy who they named William Roger Campbell. After their untimely deaths, William Jr., who went by Roger, quickly became a person of interest. However, he claimed they were still alive when he left the house that morning at 7 o'clock. Roger lived out of town but had been in town visiting his parents. Investigators searched the home for clues and found a medicine log that Ina kept. Interestingly, it abruptly stopped on the 27th. They began to believe that Bill and Ina had been dead for a couple of days before being found. That theory was given even more credit after finding Bill's newspapers from the 28th and 29th still in the mailbox. Since Roger was the last one to see them alive, it only made sense that he was a person of interest. He also didn't help his case by telling investigators multiple inconsistencies, and by the fact that he wasn't being very cooperative. He then did something that shocked everyone. He had his parents cremated, something that Bill and Ina were very much against because they wanted to be buried right next to each other. Unfortunately, they didn't have the physical evidence to tie Roger to the crime, and the case would go unsolved for the next 11 years. In 2021, the case was looked at again, and they realized that Roger's ex-wife Linda had not been thoroughly interviewed. Linda told them that on January 26, 2010, 3 days before Bill and Ina's bodies were discovered, Roger came by her work at Fort Campbell and had Ina with him. This was strange considering they hadn't seen or spoken to each other in almost 13 years. He told her that he would be leaving town again on the 28th. It was almost as if he was setting up some sort of alibi. Investigators then determined that he stood to gain $180,000 from his parents' estate once they were dead. It turns out that Roger had been a plague on the family for years and could never maintain a good relationship with anyone. In 1989, he was convicted for embezzlement. Then in 1990, he violated his probation after cashing a fraudulent check. Apparently, he had a thing for money and would do anything to get it. Now, investigators had a motive: money. They presented the circumstantial evidence to a grand jury to review, and they subsequently indicted him. In July 2021, investigators tracked him down in Georgia where he lived and arrested him for the murder of his parents. He was then extradited back to Tennessee. Roger's son, Sean, spoke very highly of his grandparents but didn't have many nice things to say about his father. He basically confirmed that his father had been a plague for years and said that anyone who had let Roger into their lives was left with only horror stories to tell. On January 23, 2023, 13 years after Bill and Ina's murder, Roger was found guilty and given 2 life sentences to be served consecutively. It's believed that Roger waited until his parents were asleep and hooked up to their oxygen before he executed them. He then staged the house to look like a burglary gone wrong. After his conviction, they asked Sean how he felt about it, to which he responded, and I quote, "I've been waiting 35 years to say F you, and the jury did it for me." Anna Repkina was born in 1990 in Moscow, Russia. In 2016, after getting out of a 7-year relationship, she went on a dating website and met a man named William Hargrove, who lived in Uzi, Oregon. The relationship quickly blossomed, and before long, she was making plans to come to the United States to meet him. During the holidays of that year, she spent a total of 10 days with William, and at the end of the trip, he asked her to marry him. She agreed, but had to return to Russia to make plans to permanently move to the United States. 3 months later, in March of 2017, she left her life in Russia and returned to Oregon with the plans to settle down and get married. However, unbeknownst to her, the man she was about to marry wasn't all he was cracked up to be. William, who worked as a mechanic at a local car dealership, was having an affair with his married landlady, Michelle Chavez, who was married to a professor who taught at Oregon State University. William lived in their home, along with the couple's 2 children. The affair had been going on the entire time he was wooing Anna, and he had no plans to stop it. William and Michelle had met while she was working as a bouncer at a bar, and before long, she offered to rent him a room at her home. Sadly, because of the affair, Anna would never get married. William would become the prime suspect in a murder case, and I kid you not when I say that somehow time travel became part of this case. Anna and William were supposed to get married on March 23, 2017, but William called it off and told her it was because the officiant couldn't show up on that day. However, he told Michelle a different story. He said he wasn't in love with Anna and was going to send her back to Russia. In the meanwhile, Michelle had forced William to move out of her home and into another place with Anna because she didn't like her being around. She also broke things off with her husband in order to be with William. However, 3 weeks later, Anna was still there and Michelle was pissed. So she gave him an ultimatum: either get rid of Anna or she was done. On April 16, 2017, a groundskeeper near Isle C, Oregon came upon Anna's body. She had sadly been shot to death. The trash that lay on the ground beside her was just as shocking. We're talking candy wrappers, fast food bags with a receipt from KFC, and cigarette cartons. She had basically flown 5,000 miles to be with who she thought was the love of her life, only to be thrown away like a piece of trash. The KFC receipt that was found was dated April 14th, 2 days before Anna's body was discovered. Investigators were able to trace the receipt right back to William. They then discovered that after she was dead, he withdrew $800 from her bank account. He then used the money to buy candy and cigars and pay for his car insurance. He also bought some Star Wars Legos. Investigators knew they had their prime suspect, but they needed to know why he murdered Anna. Police tracked down Kevin Thomas, a friend of William's, who had eaten with him that day at KFC. He told investigators about the love triangle that had turned sour. He also said that William borrowed a shotgun from him that day and never returned it, the exact type of weapon that was used to murder Anna. Based on the testimony by Kevin, investigators were able to piece together a timeline of events. They determined that on the day Anna's body was found, William took her into the woods and shot her to death with the shotgun he borrowed from Kevin. He then called Michelle and the two met and had sex a few miles away. William, clearly feeling guilty about his actions, began researching time travel on the internet. While researching, he stumbled upon a spell that he believed might allow him to travel back in time. He even saved screenshots of the web pages. He was also communicating with people through the WhatsApp, asking them for help to travel back in time to correct a horrible mistake that was made. He also offered his soul to strangers in exchange for information on time travel. On April 19, 2017, William was arrested and charged with Anna's murder. They had found the murder weapon in his vehicle and retrieved cell phone data that put him at the crime scene. However, when he was brought in for questioning, he downplayed their relationship and said he barely knew her and they had only been on 2 dates. When asked about his KFC meal with Kevin, he said he threw the bag away outside a general store. When investigators pointed out that the bag was found at the crime scene, William quickly lawyered up. He and his attorney then began putting the blame on Michelle, and his defense team would continue with that allegation throughout the trial. On the surface, it seemed that Michelle was also a victim of William's lies and deceit, but she had allegedly made some very questionable comments. When she gave William the ultimatum, she told him to, and I quote, "fix this and get rid of her." She also said if Anna was, and I quote, "Not gone by Thursday. I'm building a snowman." Michelle would later testify that building a snowman was a family joke about killing someone and hiding their body inside a snowman somewhere cold enough that it would never melt. While she insisted it was just a joke, William's attorney used that as part of their defense, claiming that it was a clear threat to kill Anna. Since the defense was trying to pin the murder on the prosecutors showed a message that William sent Michelle that read, "We'll have this solved permanently." In November 2019, William was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As for Michelle, no charges have ever been brought against her. After all was said and done, Anna's remains were cremated and shipped back to her family in Russia. In April of 2008, 18-year-old Quina Fu was living in Bloomingdale, Florida with her mother, Vanna Nguyen. Quina was a senior in high school working at the clothing store Abercrombie & Fitch. She was described as a very happy and energetic individual. Toward the end of April, she was making plans to graduate and getting ready for her senior prom. That is until a horrible tragedy changed her life forever. On April 24, 2008, after Quina got off work, she went to the Bloomingdale Regional Public Library in Brandon, Florida to return some books. Since the library was already closed, she was just going to drop them off. However, when she pulled up, she noticed a man sitting on the bench nearby and found that rather strange. She was on the phone with her friend Rachel and told her about the man and asked if she would stay on the phone while she dropped off the books. Quina got out of her car and opened the rear door where the books were. Then suddenly Rachel heard a terrifying scream and the call ended. When Rachel tried to call her back, there was no answer. She had a friend who lived nearby and she called and asked them to run over and check on her. She also called Quina's mother Vanna and informed her of the situation. When the other friend arrived about 30 minutes later, they found Quina's car still running with the door open. They noticed blood on the ground along with her cell phone, which was now broken into pieces. At that point, the police were called. When they arrived and began searching the area, they discovered Quina's badly beaten body behind the library, but thankfully she was still alive. She was quickly airlifted to a nearby hospital in very critical condition. She then fell into a coma, but regained consciousness the following day. Surprisingly, she remembered what happened, and one of the first things she asked was, "Did they find him?" This moment of joy quickly faded, as the swelling in her brain worsened, causing her to have a seizure. Doctors quickly performed emergency brain surgery to reduce the swelling and then placed her into a medically induced coma. In the meanwhile, investigators discovered a utensil from the fast food restaurant Wendy's and took it for evidence. They also learned that not only had Quina been attacked, but she was also sexually assaulted. It wasn't long before the suspect was identified as 16-year-old Kendrick Morris, a sophomore in high school. As they dug into Morris's past, they learned he had been caught torturing animals, which is typically a psychopathic trait. 3 weeks after the attack, Quina came out of the coma. Unfortunately, she was now in a permanent vegetative state that left her blind and no longer able to walk or speak. However, she still has that beautiful smile she was always known for. She is now in the permanent care of her family and requires around-the-clock care. While her recovery has been difficult, she has been able to take a few steps with assistance and make a few sounds. She even got to have the experience of her prom that she sadly missed. Now back to the piece of shit who destroyed her life. It turns out he had also attacked and sexually assaulted a daycare worker. For both crimes, he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. A law was then enacted that allowed him to request a resentencing in 2017. In an amazing turn of events, he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole and, in my opinion, the sentence he should have originally received. Rachel Hannah Moran was born to parents Patty and Ronald on May 20, 1986 in Dover, New Hampshire. In 2023, 37-year-old Rachel was the mother of 5 children living in Baltimore, Maryland. She was also dating a man by the name of Richard Tobin. Family and friends described her as a very devoted mother who was the life of the party and had a great sense of humor. She loved fashion, fitness, and traveling to such places as Miami and Vegas. On Saturday, August 5, 2023, Rachel went for a walk on the Ma and Pa Trail in Harford County, Maryland. The trail follows the old Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad and is typically known as a safe location with frequent visitors. After leaving her home that day, she was never seen alive again. Later that day, when she failed to return home, Richard went out looking for her and discovered her car in a parking lot at the entrance to the trail. At 11:20 p.m., he called police and reported her missing. The following day, a search party was formed and set out on the trail looking for her. At 1:07 p.m., a Native American tracker by the name of Michael Gazbrzuski and his stepdaughter, Cecilia, who was friends with Rachel and had joined in on the search, found her naked body in a culvert off the trail. She had sadly been sexually assaulted and beaten to death. The injuries to her head were so severe, she was almost unrecognizable. Richard was immediately looked at as a person of interest, not only because he was the one who found her car, but because he had been arrested 14 times since 2014 on charges including drug dealing, assault, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. People on social media also began pointing fingers at him. However, at the time of Rachel's murder, he had been clean for 15 months and was getting his life in order. He also took to social media to declare his innocence. Within a couple of weeks, the DNA from the crime scene ruled him out. The DNA was then uploaded to Cody's and matched to a wanted suspect in a case from California. Unfortunately, they didn't know the suspect in that case either, and the match was only between the DNA retrieved from both crime scenes. The case in California occurred in March 2023, when the suspect entered a home in Los Angeles and assaulted a 9-year-old girl and her mother. The man was captured on the front door security camera, but unfortunately, you couldn't see his face. The following month after Rachel's murder in September of 2023, investigators enlisted the help of Othram. After generating a DNA profile, their genealogy team got to work. In the meanwhile, investigators released a composite sketch of the suspect, hoping someone might recognize him. More than 1,000 tips across 7 states came in, but they were still unable to identify him. Finally, genealogists were able to provide investigators with some new investigative leads. And in early May 2024, the suspect was identified as 23-year-old Victor Antonio Martinez Hernandez. He had crossed into the country illegally in February 2023 after fleeing El Salvador, where he was also wanted for murder. Now that they had a name, they just needed to find him. On June 14, 2024, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder after he was found sitting in a bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He is currently in jail in Tulsa awaiting extradition back to Maryland. Terrence Waynes Wicker, who went by Trey, was born on September 3, 1996 to parents Amanda McFarland and Terry Wicker. In 2011, 14-year-old Trey was staying with his mother in Louisville, Kentucky. His mother, Amanda, was married to a convicted felon by the name of Joshua Gauker. Josh Young, his son from another woman, also lived with them. At the time, Trey was a freshman honor roll student at Seneca High School and appeared to have everything going for him until his life was tragically cut short. On May 11, 2011, students at Liberty High School were at the creek behind the school and shockingly found Trey's body. He had sadly been beaten to death. This location was within walking distance from his mother's home. Suspicions immediately began swirling around his new stepfamily. His stepbrother, Josh Young, was brought in for questioning but denied involvement, saying he and his father liked Trey and would have never done that. Young had even been a pallbearer at Trey's funeral. Strangely, though, he never showed any emotions about his stepbrother's murder. Young's own father, Gauker, told investigators he felt his son was responsible. Plus, Gauker was ruled out after providing an alibi. He was with Amanda and was seen on surveillance footage buying cigarettes from a gas station. Investigators eventually felt they had enough evidence and arrested 15-year-old Young in early 2012 and charged him with the murder. In a shocking twist, 39-year-old Gauker came forward and confessed to Trey's murder during his son's trial. He was then brought in to testify and said he took Trey behind Liberty High School to confront him for allegedly stealing a lighter and a plate of food. He then beat him to death with a pipe. He said the main reason for the murder was because Amanda was pregnant by him but had the child aborted. Because of Gawker's confession, a jury found Young not guilty, and the judge dismissed all charges. Trey's family was extremely upset and felt that he got away with murder. Meanwhile, Gawker entered a guilty plea and was sentenced to life in prison. Then in 2014, he tried to change his story and put the blame back on his son, saying he only pleaded guilty to spare him from prison. He then tried to have his conviction tossed out, but a judge rejected that. Interestingly, there is evidence that points to Young being the actual murderer. He was involved in a relationship with his cousin who lived next door to them. She said that around 1:30 a.m. on the night in question, Young showed up and said he murdered Trey. He then asked her to drive him somewhere to get rid of his blood-stained clothes and the baseball bat that he used. To this day, that bat has never been recovered. There's also the fact that Gawker provided incorrect details about the murder, such as using a pipe versus a bat. He also slipped up while on the stand and said when talking about the crime, in 2014, appeared on the Dr. Phil show along with Trey's father. During the show, he begged Young to tell them the truth, but he continued insisting he had nothing to do with the murder. Dr. Phil then called Gawker at the Kentucky State Penitentiary. During that call, Gawker once again put the blame on his son. Young's life would only go downhill from there from multiple arrests for assault, drug, and gun charges. Then in 2018, this case would take another shocking turn when Young wrote a confession letter while incarcerated at Grayson County Detention Center. In the letter, he took blame for the murder and said his father was innocent. He then told a new version of events. He said that on the night in question, he met Trey behind the school to smoke some marijuana. He claims Trey was being a smartass, which upset him, so he began hitting him with his baseball bat. He said he had the bat because he and Trey would often vandalize cars and people's windows. He said his hate for him began when they got pulled over one time and Trey told on him for having weed. He then confirmed his cousin was telling the truth about him going to her house that night to get rid of the bat and his clothes. Together, they went to an apartment complex and threw the items in a dumpster. He said that after the murder, he and his father took a vacation to Tennessee and then Alabama. While on that trip, he began confessing to that murder, but Gawker stopped him, saying he would need to pass a polygraph and didn't want to know the details. Could it be possible he's just saying all this because he is trying to get his father out of jail and doesn't believe he can be retried due to double jeopardy? After Trey's murder, Young got a teardrop tattoo and later admitted that it was for Trey. He has also never shown any remorse for the crime and was quoted as saying "I don't even like the dude, I don't care. I mean, bad shit happened to better people. You know what I'm saying?" While this case is considered solved, many now wonder if the wrong person is behind bars. Do y'all think they both belong there because of how they destroyed Trey's family? Let me know what y'all think in the comments below. Ashley Ann Olsen was born in 1980 to parents Walter and Paula and grew up in Summer Haven. She was described as a beautiful, creative young woman with a happy, exuberant, generous soul. In 2014, after the divorce from her husband, 35-year-old Ashley moved to Florence, Italy to be near her father and to attend the Florence Art School, Bianca Capella. She ended up in a studio apartment in the Altrino neighborhood. She was very excited about her new life and began dating a Florentine artist by the name of Federico Fiorentini. On January 8, 2016, Ashley went to the Monte Carlo nightclub and after leaving was never seen alive again. The following day, Federico went to her apartment after being unable to get in touch with her. Since he didn't have a key to get in, he contacted the landlord who agreed to let him inside. That's when he tragically found Ashley strangled to death. When investigators arrived, they collected a cigarette butt and a used condom from her bathroom. Based on the DNA found under her fingernails, it appeared she had tried to fight off her attacker. Missing from her apartment was her cell phone and some of her personal belongings. Investigators then checked security footage from the nightclub and saw her leaving with a Senegalese national who was in the country illegally. The man with the last name of Diao was brought in for questioning and had his DNA tested against the DNA found under her fingernails, on the cigarette and from the condom, and it was a match. He was then subsequently arrested and charged with her murder. He said that the two of them were doing cocaine and drinking, and after arriving back at her apartment, they got into a physical altercation after engaging in consensual sex. However, he claimed that when he left, she was still alive. Her family didn't believe the sexual encounter was consensual because Ashley had received treatment days earlier for a severe bladder infection and was taking antibiotics. Plus, the autopsy showed that not only had she been strangled to death, but he had fractured her skull in 2 different places. Dal claimed that after sex, Ashley wanted him to leave and began pushing him to the door. He said when she turned her back to him, he punched her in the back of the head. At that point, he claims they got into a shoving match and that he picked her up by the neck and put her on the bed alive and moaning in pain. After that, he left her apartment. However, he never admitted to strangling her, but the autopsy showed she had been strangled with some type of rope or cord. Investigators were also surprised to find that he came back to her apartment for a second time. Regardless, Diao was convicted of murder and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Denise Annette Hubert was born in Modesto, California on November 22, 1967. After high school, she earned a degree in social sciences from the University of California, Irvine, and then moved back in with her parents in Newport Beach. She was described as a very social individual with lots of friends. In 1991, 24-year-old Denise was working as a server at the Old Spaghetti Factory. On the night of June 2nd, she and a coworker named Robert Calvert went to a Morrissey concert in Inglewood after her boyfriend, Stephen Horrocks, was unable to go. Unfortunately, when she was less than 3 miles from home, her rear tire blew out on the Corona del Mar freeway. When her parents woke up the next morning and realized she wasn't in her room, they assumed she spent the night at Rob's place or maybe her friend Tammy Brown's house. She called Tammy that morning to see if Denise was there, but sadly she wasn't. She in turn called Rob, who said the last time he saw her was when she dropped him off at home after the concert. Tammy then decided to drive the route that Denise would have taken. That's when she discovered Denise's car with a flat tire on the side of the freeway just before the Newport Beach exit. Unfortunately, Denise was nowhere to be found, and missing along with her were her car keys and purse. Police began searching the area with helicopters and canine units. The dogs were able to track her scent for about 75 yards before it vanished. They brought Rob in for questioning, who said he and Denise had gone for drinks at a local bar after the concert, and that she dropped him off around 2 a.m. He agreed to a polygraph and passed. Rob told investigators about Denise's boyfriend, Steve, but he had a solid alibi and was also ruled out. A few years later, retirees Jack and Elaine Court had moved to Prescott Valley, Arizona, and began selling paint supplies at a local swap meet. In July of 1994, they met a new vendor by the name of John, who sold painting-related items. John invited the couple out to his house to see his inventory, and they agreed with the hopes of buying stuff for their business. However, when they arrived at his house, they saw a 24-foot yellow Ryder moving truck parked in the back driveway and found that very strange. Regardless, they bought their supplies and left, but Elaine couldn't get the thought of that truck out of her mind. Thinking it might be stolen, they went back and secretly wrote down the license plate number. They then gave the plate information to a customer of theirs who worked as a deputy. After running the plate, it turns out Elaine was right. The truck had been reported stolen about 6 months earlier. After discovering that, he called in the location of the stolen Ryder truck, and a deputy took the call and went to John's house. However, when he arrived, no one was home. He then decided to check the truck out for himself and noticed some things that made him think John was using the truck as a drug lab. For instance, there were chemicals sitting outside the truck, and there was an extension cord running from the back over to the neighbor's house. It would later be revealed that that house belonged to his mother. The officer worked quickly, and less than an hour later, the narcotics team was there with a search warrant and opened the truck. Inside, they found a padlocked deep freezer, which they assumed was filled with drugs. Officers had no clue they were about to discover the remains of Denise. She was found on her knees with her arms handcuffed behind her back, and her mouth was duct-taped shut. While there, John, whose full name is John Joseph Familaro, arrived back home but didn't seem bothered by the presence of law enforcement. After arresting him for the truck theft, they brought him back to the station for questioning. At first, he was being oddly cooperative, that is until they mentioned the freezer. At that point, he refused to talk and requested an attorney. He was then arrested and charged with murder and grand theft auto. Meanwhile, officers began searching John's home while the medical examiner's office was trying to determine the identity of the woman found in the freezer. As they entered his basement, they found blood and tissue, as well as women's clothing, purses, and social security cards. At the back of the basement was a dugout hidden underground room. At this point, they were thinking they were going to discover more bodies and brought in a cadaver dog, but came up empty-handed. Before John moved to Arizona in the summer of 1992, he was renting a warehouse in California. Investigators searched the building and found dried blood, but still no other victims. At that point, they began contacting other agencies, which eventually led them to a woman who had a horrible experience with him. She said after meeting him in Phoenix, Arizona, he drove her out into the middle of the desert and proceeded to strangle her. Thankfully, she was able to fight him off and escape. Unfortunately, she never reported the incident to the police. However, she never forgot his face and immediately picked him out of a photo lineup. Once she came forward, it prompted other victims to come forward and share their stories. Multiple women said he had handcuffed them to beds without their consent, while others talked about his violent and disturbing behavior. Eventually, they were able to identify the remains as belonging to Denise. Inside his home, they found her purse with her identification inside, along with her clothes and newspaper clippings about her disappearance. He had even recorded an episode of Inside Edition that featured Denise's case. Since the warehouse where he ran his painting business in Laguna Hills, California was not far from where Denise's car was found. Investigators theorized he stumbled upon Denise while she was trying to fix the flat on her car. They believe he struck her with a hammer and drove her back to the warehouse where he proceeded to sexually assault her. Once done, he killed her. Luminol was sprayed on a room in the back of the warehouse and revealed lots of blood on the walls. As to why he killed Denise's body, investigators say he was a hoarder and could never throw anything away. John has since been dubbed the Icebox Killer, and in 1994, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. Strangely, they've never found any other bodies. It could be that Denise was his first murder victim, especially considering the lengths he went to preserve the body. Plus, it's possible he dug out the area in his basement in preparation for more murders. It's now been 30 years since he was sentenced to death, but as of 2024, he is still awaiting execution at California's San Quentin State Prison. Judith Weaver was born and raised in Everett, Washington, and went by Judy. Judy was described as street smart and a very likable person. When she was 17 years old, she was crowned the queen of a local beauty pageant. In 1984, 42-year-old Judy was living in an apartment in Everett and was the co-owner of Bell Nest Cafe. She worked there along with her mother, Edith Peralt, and her daughter, Kathy Myers. After work on the night of June 1, 1984, she began her walk home and stopped by a Dairy Queen where she ordered some ice cream. Sadly, that was the last time she was ever seen alive. A little after midnight on June 2nd, a passerby noticed a fire at Judy's one-story apartment building and used a payphone to call 911. When firefighters arrived and entered her apartment, they found that the fire was contained to her bedroom and the bedroom door was closed. The smoke was so thick they had to crawl into the room. Once inside, they found her body lying on a burning bed. After putting out the flames, they found Judy tied up and strangled to death with a phone cord. Thankfully, the fire didn't destroy all the evidence. Interestingly, the fire was started on her bed using a paper towel stuck in a jar of Pond's cold cream. With little to no leads, the case would then go unsolved for the next 40 years. In 2022, detectives with the Everett Police Department decided to submit evidence from the crime scene to the Washington State Patrol Crime Lab with the hopes that DNA could be extracted. After generating a DNA profile, it was uploaded to Cody's, and to their surprise, they got a match to 66-year-old Mitchell Gaff. In order to further prove his DNA matched the DNA from the crime scene, they came up with a very unique idea. They approached Gaff and said they were doing a survey on gum flavors to determine which one consumers liked the best. He then proceeded to try different pieces of gum, and upon discarding each one of them, The undercover detectives kept the pieces and had them tested for DNA. The results, once again, proved that Gaff's DNA matched the DNA collected from pieces of fabric that were used to bind her wrists. Come to find out, Gaff was a level 3 sex offender, which means the state has determined he is at a high risk of reoffending. In 1979, he was convicted for the assault of a woman that he had forced to the ground with a gun while she was putting her lawnmower away in her garage. He bound her and repeatedly hit her with his pistol, but thankfully she was able to get away. For that crime, he was given a 5-year suspended sentence along with probation, meaning he never served any of his time. 2 months after Judy's murder, 26-year-old Gaff was arrested for attacking 2 sisters while they slept in their home. He then sexually assaulted them after tying them up with a telephone extension cord. Thankfully, one of the sisters escaped and got help. Gaff confessed that at one point he was attacking anywhere from 10 to 30 women a day by knocking them to the ground and putting his hands up their skirts. He was also more active during the summer months because he had a thing for women in skimpy clothes. For the attack on the sisters, he pleaded guilty and was determined to unfit to continue living in the community and was committed for 11 years. The state also labeled him, and I quote, a sexually violent predator. After being released in 2006, he changed his name to Sam Wise Price. On May 1, 2024, he was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for the death of Judy. He was also charged with first-degree sexual assault, first-degree arson, first-degree kidnapping, and first-degree burglary. Investigators could also find no evidence that Judy and Gaff knew each other. This is very important because a person can always claim to know their victim to explain why their DNA was found in the apartment. Gaff never did that and instead invoked his right to remain silent and pleaded not guilty. As of June 2024, his trial date is still pending and he is being held without bail. Pava Marie Lapierre was born on January 21, 1997 in Tucson, Arizona. After high school, she enrolled in the computer science program at Johns Hopkins University in 2019 before changing her major to sociology because she wanted to use entrepreneurship to improve societal inequalities. By 2023, 26-year-old Pava was living in Baltimore, Maryland, where she was CEO of Ecomap Technologies, a company she founded with Sherrod Davis. The company was very successful, and she even made the Forbes 30 Under 30 list in the social impact category. Pava was making a huge impact on the world until her life was sadly cut short by an evil individual. On Friday night, September 22, 2023, all communications with Pava suddenly stopped. By the 25th, when friends and family had still not heard from her, they reported her missing. That same day, Pava was found murdered on the rooftop of her apartment building. She had tragically been beaten and strangled to death. Investigators were able to retrieve security footage from the building and saw her right before her murder in the lobby of the building, letting an unknown man inside after he waved at her. Sadly, this would be the biggest mistake of her life. After letting him in, they could be seen conversing before entering the elevator together. After that, she was never seen alive again. That same man was caught again on camera about 40 minutes later, coming out of a stairwell and quickly exiting the building while wiping his right hand on his shorts. It would later be discovered that he had been following Pava as she walked home that evening. The man was later identified as 32-year-old convicted violent sex offender Jason Dean Billingsley. At the time, he was on supervised probation after being released early from prison for another crime. He has a lengthy criminal record with arrest in 2009, 2011, and 2013 for sex offenses, assault charges, and burglary. Come to find out, he was also wanted in connection with attempted murder, arson, and sexual assault that occurred 3 days before Pava was murdered. In 2015, he was convicted of a first-degree sex offense charge and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. However, because he took a plea deal and pleaded guilty, he was only required to serve 14 years, but that was cut down to 7 years after receiving credit for good behavior. After murdering Pava, he went on the run. During that time, his mother made a plea for him to turn himself in. On September 27th, U.S. Marshals located him near a train station in Bowie, Maryland, and took him into custody. He was then charged with Pava's murder and even confessed to the crime. Since Pava's death, Her parents, along with Maryland Governor Wes Moore, endorsed legislation to restrict sex offenders from earning good time credits. In May of 2024, that bill was passed and will hopefully keep sex offenders from being released early for good behavior. As of June 2024, it appears his case is still going through legal proceedings, and he remains in jail without bail. Samantha Nicole Heller was born on January 16, 1995 in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and went by the nickname Sammy. In December 2012, 17-year-old Sammy was a senior at McCaskey High School and was described as a very funny and social individual who made friends easily. She enjoyed playing softball and field hockey and enjoyed riding horses and motorcycles. When she was 15, she met and fell in love with 17-year-old Benjamin Daniel Klinger. However, her friends and family were less than thrilled with him and described him as having a very dark and distant personality. They also described their relationship as very volatile. Unfortunately, all attempts to keep Sammy away from him were unsuccessful. Over time, her relationship with Ben began to change her, and she eventually lost her humor and the social spark that she had been known for. No matter what Ben did, she would always take him back after he apologized. Sadly, her relationship with Ben eventually led to a horrible tragedy. Over time, his abusive and controlling nature toward her worsened. He had threatened to kill her and even pushed her down a set of stairs once. At some point, he ran over her foot with his car and was distributing illicit photos of her. At that point, she had enough and decided to press charges against him in June 2012. For running over her foot, he was charged with assault. For the next 6 months, they didn't see each other, and Sammy's family said she was slowly returning to normal. Plus, during that time, Ben got a new girlfriend, which made him even angrier about the charges that were pressed against him and the fact that Sammy's mother was trying to get charges against him for distributing photos of a minor. If those charges went through, it would require Ben to register as a sex offender. However, he wasn't going down lightly and came up with a plan to get rid of Sammy. It's unclear how he coaxed her into his car, but on December 4, 2012, Sammy was riding with him near Route 283 in Raffo Township when he accelerated his Toyota sedan to about 100 miles per hour. Sammy, probably knowing this wasn't going to end well, sent her mom a final text saying, and I quote, "I love you, Mama." He then intentionally drove the car into a guardrail. Unfortunately, Sammy wasn't wearing her seatbelt and was thrown from the car but was still alive. Ben, on the other hand, was wearing his seatbelt. It's possible Ben wouldn't let her put the seatbelt on if his plan was to kill her, or he could have removed it before he crashed the car. When other motorists came upon the accident, they saw Ben on top of her and heard her screaming, "Get off of me." By the time emergency services arrived, she was dead. Apparently, when the crash failed, he suffocated her to death by sitting on her. I know a lot of y'all are going to ask why witnesses didn't help her, and honestly, I have no answer for that. I've seen that question asked in the comment section of other videos regarding this case, and pretty much everyone is dumbfounded. After the accident, Ben was taken to the hospital where he told his new girlfriend, "At least now you don't have to worry about her getting between me and you." Upon hearing that, investigators knew they had a motive for the murder, then clearly felt that the charges against him were going to take him away from his new girlfriend. He even wrote on Facebook, I quote, "Sometimes you have to give up what you love most to get what you will love more." On December 9th, he was charged with felony counts of disseminating explicit material regarding the photos of Sammy. 17 days after her murder on December 21, 2012, Ben was arrested at his home and charged with a straight homicide instead of vehicular homicide, aggravated assault by vehicle, reckless endangerment, drug possession, and several traffic violations. Another shocking layer of the murder is that Ben thought she was pregnant either by him or another man when he decided to take her life. It was later determined she wasn't, but he didn't know that when he murdered her. In the end, he took a plea deal and pleaded guilty to third-degree murder and was sentenced to 28 to 56 years behind bars. After receiving the long sentence, he tried to take back the guilty plea and claimed his attorney gave him bad advice. Thankfully, the judge rejected his claim. Bethany Ann Israel was born in Minneapolis on September 11, 1993 to Mark and Judy Ball. Bethany was described as a kind and compassionate individual. In high school, she played basketball and volleyball and also had a love for music, eventually learning how to play the flute. After high school, she attended Howells Anderson College and then earned her master's degree in education from Maranatha Baptist University. She had a passion for teaching and volleyball, eventually coaching at the Hammerhead Club and then at Breck High School. While at the Apple Valley Volleyball Open Gym, she met and fell in love with Josh Israel. Together, they traveled around exploring places such as Jamaica and Mexico. Then on April 30th, 2021, during the height of the COVID pandemic, she and Josh eloped in Jamaica. By May of 2024, they were living in Bloomington, Minnesota, and 30-year-old Bethany was 17 to 18 weeks pregnant with their first child. Sadly, she would never get the chance to experience motherhood. On May 23, 2024, around 6 p.m., Bethany went to her 23-year-old brother Jack Joseph Ball's home for dinner. After arriving, all communications with her and her brother suddenly stopped. Within a few hours, her family had become extremely concerned when they couldn't get in touch with either of them. Her mother then decided to drive over to her son's home to find out what was going on. She arrived just in time to see him fleeing the home. Around 11 p.m., she entered the home just enough to see a large amount of blood. After deciding not to go any further, she stepped back outside and called 911. On the call, she told the operator she believed her daughter was dead inside. When officers arrived and entered the home, they shockingly found Bethany dead on the kitchen floor with some of her body parts missing. Sadly, her unborn son was also killed during the attack. As they searched the home, they found a bloody saw, hatchet, and multiple bloody knives. The mother was asked where she thought her son might have gone, and she said the cemetery in Rosemont because they had relatives buried there. As police searched for Jack and the missing body parts, a 911 call came in from a person in Rosemont, about 5 miles away from the crime scene, saying they witnessed a man on their Ring doorbell camera placing what appeared to be body parts on the front step. When authorities arrived, they found more of Bethany's remains and also noticed Jack's car parked in a nearby driveway. They continued searching and eventually found him near a shed covered in blood with some more of the missing body parts. He apparently tried to take his own life, but was still conscious and talking. He was then rushed to a nearby hospital. Everyone was baffled until the investigators found his journals and handwritten papers that spoke of his anger toward his sister for getting pregnant. Had written that his sister was, and I quote, no longer innocent. It's possible that Jack was struggling with serious mental health issues, which caused him to take his religious beliefs to the extreme. After Jack was admitted to the hospital, he was charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder for killing Bethany and her unborn child. I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about this case as the court proceedings begin to ramp up. But as of May 27th, he was still in the hospital. Once he is medically cleared, he will be transferred to the Dakota County Jail. Lauren Brittany DiMolo was born in 1990. At the age of 29, she was living in Cape Coral, Florida with her boyfriend Gabriel Pena, known as Gabby, at 4927 Coronado Parkway apartment number 1, and it's reported they had a very tumultuous relationship. Lauren didn't own a car and often walked places in the area around her apartment. On June 19, 2020, Gabby said when he left for work that morning, Lauren was still sleeping. When Gabby returned from work that day, Lauren was gone, but her cell phone was still in the apartment and she never left home without it. So, he called Lauren's father Paul later that night to tell him he was concerned, and this was the first time he had ever called Paul. Her father didn't become very concerned until the next day. Strangely, Gabby didn't spend the next night in the apartment, but instead he stayed with a friend. Another day passed, and when her father, who lived out of state, checked back in with Gabby for updates, he said there was still no sign of Lauren and that he had contacted the police, but they never showed up for a report. So, Paul contacted the Cape Coral police and they said that they never got a call about a missing person. So Gabby then admitted that he never filed the report. But he told Paul that he would go actually file one that day on June 21st. At this point, it had been 2 days since she was last seen, and Paul starts to become more suspicious of Gabby being involved in his daughter's disappearance because just weeks earlier, Lauren confided in him that Gabby had physically assaulted her. The day before she went missing, she was released from her second involuntary psychiatric hold that month because she had been experiencing psychosis with paranoia and auditory hallucinations. She had to stay longer than 72 hours because she harmed herself during that time because voices in her head were telling her to hurt herself in order to save the world. The first time she was put in psychiatric hold was after she jumped into the Bimini Basin and began swimming towards Four Freedoms Park, where swimming is not allowed because she thought someone was after her. Once police arrived, she jumped back in the water. But once she got out of the water, she was talking about aliens and voices in her head. Once released, she was prescribed an antipsychotic. It was never picked up. She was known to use drugs in the past, which is why she had lost custody of her young daughter, Michaela. Her family believed that she had been clean for 2 years besides marijuana, trying to get custody back of her daughter. But Gabby stated that Lauren had relapsed once again and had a low tolerance for drugs. She had problems with heroin in the past, but Gabby and Victor, who was Lauren's mother's boyfriend, said she had started trying synthetic ecstasy or MDMA, which caused her severe strange symptoms. At the mental health facility, her toxicology report only showed THC and Suboxone, a common opioid blocker prescribed to treat opiate addiction. But they apparently didn't drug screen her until after 72 hours, and drugs such as ecstasy would not be detected after about 8 hours. Ecstasy works by prompting the brain to initiate this fight or flight response, and the user feels refreshed by a burst of energy. It can also distort your experience of reality by influencing perceptions of sight and sound. This could explain her recent erratic and concerning behavior. Not long after being released from the hospital the first time, she began having the same symptoms and was readmitted again for several days. The hospital discovered that she had a chemical imbalance from a recent procedure she had done at a clinic. Before that, she had no known history of mental health problems. When she was released from the hospital the second time, the day before she went missing, she spent the day applying for jobs. She applied at a local convenience store and was caught on surveillance camera leaving with the application. Her sister Cassie spoke to her about 6:30 that evening and said she sounded tired and stated she was worried that she would lose her job at Taco Bell for missing so many days while dealing with her mental health. This was at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and her sister told her she would help her apply for unemployment the next day. 5 days after she disappeared, it was discovered once all her family became more heavily involved that a clerical error occurred when Gabby filed a missing persons report, which resulted in no one initially being assigned to her case. Lauren's purse was found by a homeless man on a table at the nearby Four Freedoms Park, the same purse she was carrying in the video surveillance while applying for jobs earlier. The park was located just a block from Lauren and Gabby's apartment. Four Freedoms Park is a place that Lauren often spent a lot of time meditating, and her mother lived across from it as well, and she often visited her. Divers entered the Bimini Basin to search for Lauren but found nothing. Within 2 days of her going missing, her family located what appeared to be pieces of her orange-painted artificial fingernails on the ground outside her apartment. The last text message she sent from her phone read, "You guys coming?" Lauren could only operate her phone via Wi-Fi, and she messaged through an app called TalkU or Facebook. This message was sent the night before Gabby said that he left her asleep in bed after 6 a.m. Friday morning to go to work. Investigators apparently know who the message was sent to but have not publicly released the name. On July 2, 2020, a shirt was discovered by the waterline at Four Freedoms Park. Lauren's family said it was one of her favorite shirts, and authorities noted it was odd since they had searched that area of the park several times and would have noticed it, so they believed that it was planted there. It also strangely was not very dirty and appeared to have just been put there. 2.5 weeks later, on July 20th, cadaver dogs were brought in to Four Freedoms Park. The dogs went straight across the street to Lauren's mother's home. Her mother lived there with her boyfriend Victor. Victor and Gabby worked together and both shared the work van that Victor owned, and at times Gabby used it and actually used it himself without Victor around the time Lauren went missing. The dogs alerted on that van right away. The dogs then went up the stairs to the apartment of Anne and Victor and hit on a curtain. The van and curtain were sent off for analysis. The van showed Lauren's DNA, but authorities said it was determined that the dogs may have hit on the van because it was used to transport old carpet from homes that someone could have died on or for methane gas. Lauren also rode in the van often. Lauren's sister and father reported that Ann and Victor had not been helping in the search for Lauren in the weeks since she went missing and didn't show very much concern, but were definitely defending Gabby during this time. This caused a lot of tension between the two sides of Lauren's family. During the investigation, the maintenance man of Lauren's apartment complex stated that Lauren approached him about 8 a.m. the morning she went missing, 2 hours after Gabby left for work, and stated that she needed help finding an apartment so she could get out of a bad situation. There were other people in Lauren's life that have an extensive criminal record. She was involved with a man named Carl Crow that lived in the same apartment building as her. Crow has been in and out of jail for not only drug trafficking, but for covering up the overdose death of another young woman, Kaylu Masu of Cape Coral, just 2 months before Lauren went missing. Once she was discovered deceased in his house after days of partying, Crow and several others dumped her body instead of calling police because she wasn't the first person to overdose in his home. Although he was behind bars at the time Lauren went missing, his two acquaintances, Jose Rivera and Josh Acapel, were not, and both have lengthy criminal records as well. Josh lived near Lauren and claimed he saw her walking past his apartment about 10 a.m. the morning she went missing, and they had waved to one another. Another person of interest important to mention is a man named Shannon Ryan. Shannon is a self-proclaimed witch, and he ran a Facebook group known as Lightworkers of the World that Lauren and her mom frequently interacted with. He was arrested and charged with murdering Lila Cavett in Florida and leaving her 2-year-old son wandering alone at an apartment complex. Up until his arrest, all his Facebook posts on the Lightworkers of the World page were positive and inspiring or about chakra and astral projecting until all of a sudden they weren't. Instead, they became very threatening right before he was arrested. Lauren's mom, and died of COVID-19 while in the hospital fighting sepsis just a few months after Lauren went missing. For days later, Lauren's stepmom Tracy DeMallo passed away. Strangely, the day Lauren's mom and was sent to the hospital after being found unresponsive in her bathroom, she had a visit from the same maintenance man that saw Lauren the morning she went missing. So he may have been the last person to see Lauren before she went missing and the last person to see her mother and before she became deathly ill. It is of note that while hospitalized and barely responsive, she strangely mumbled his name, Michael. Turns out another twist exists. Michael, the maintenance man, and Gabby both previously lived 12 miles apart in Racine, Wisconsin. Although it could be a simple coincidence, they both ended up in Cape Coral, Florida, intertwined in the same missing persons case. As usual, law enforcement most likely has evidence that they just can't tell Lauren's family or the public about because it could hinder the investigation, which I imagine could be super frustrating to her loved ones. Lauren's father, Paul, along with her siblings and the rest of her family, have not given up hope of finding Lauren, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Brooke Samantha Cady was born in Billings, Montana on August 12, 1981. Brooke spent junior high and high school years in Laurel, Montana, and graduated in 1999. Brooke participated in multiple sports in school and would play in the summer softball league every year. She was just an all-around athletic person who lived a very healthy lifestyle. She loved the outdoors, and one of her favorite places was Yellowstone National Park. She was attending college and was enrolled in the paramedic program. She worked at Famous Staves for 7 years and continued working there while she was going to school. On December 31, 2009, she gave birth to a son she named Caden. The father of the child was Corey Alvarado, who she had met on a blind date 2 years earlier. After dating for a while, Brooke moved into Corey's house on Dry Gulch in Emerald Hills, Montana, which was across the street from his parents, Victor and Lori Alvarado's home. When Brooke went for her 6-week checkup after giving birth, the appointment went fine and she was healthy and doing very well. However, Brooke and Corey's relationship had taken a turn for the worse, and she was planning on taking Caden and moving back home. Not only had her and Corey's relationship become strained, she also did not get along with Corey's mother, Lori. In fact, she was downright scared of Lori. Then on March 8, 2010, Corey allegedly found Brooke in bed not breathing. Did he call 911? Yes, but allegedly only after calling his mother, Lori, first. Apparently, Brooke had been deceased in her bed for several hours. While an autopsy was inconclusive, it did reveal some chemicals in Brooke's tissue that are commonly found in oil fields. As it turns out, Corey had supposedly been working in the back in oil fields for an oil company and had been in the lab with chemicals. Strangely, Corey's family completely cleaned out the house immediately after the sheriff's department left and hauled everything to the dump according to witnesses. Corey's mom then hired a defense attorney right away for him and allegedly refused to cooperate with the investigation. A rumor was spread that Brooke died of an infection caused by dental work, but according to her family, this is simply not true. Brooke's family states that Corey and his family have sadly refused to allow them to see Caden since her death. Corey has since remarried and Brooke's family begs for him and Lori to speak with the investigator. Brooke's case is still open at Yellowstone County Sheriff's Department, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Megan Kristen Curl was born Megan Romero in 1973. In the year 2000, she was living in Lufkin, Texas in the Fox Run apartments. She was described as outgoing, kind, and fun-loving, and was diagnosed with a very mild mental disability in the first grade. Growing up, Megan was bullied because she was a little different. Her mother said she'd always come back with a kind word for them. As an adult, she was known to be naive and overly trusting of men. She married at the age of 18 and lived in Arkansas for several years but would divorce because of abuse. Her mother, Sherry McClung, said that men often took advantage of her daughter, preying on her loneliness and vulnerability. She said that it was obvious to others that Megan wanted to be loved and accepted, and this made her an easy target as she was very outgoing. On the night of March 25, 2000, 26-year-old Megan was out dancing at a club called the Electric Cowboy. The bar was a place that she often went to and was known as a regular. But this night, she was seen talking to a man who other regulars would say was a new face in the bar that they'd never seen before. He was seen spending a lot of the night talking to Megan and buying her drinks. At some point that night, however, she was asked to leave because of her provocative dancing. She left the bar and went to a club called Sports Shack down the street from the Electric Cowboy. Megan was seen in Sports Shack talking to a number of people, and then she was ready to go home, so she accepted a ride from one of the bar's employees. He dropped her off at her apartment building just after 1:30 a.m., where she then got into a conversation with a friend and fellow tenant in the building who had waited for Megan to get back. While the two women were talking about Megan's evening, the friend said that a car suddenly sped into the parking lot and came to an abrupt halt. Megan indicated that the driver was a man she'd met earlier, and the friend went back inside the apartment building. When she came back outside, she noticed the car was still there, but didn't see anyone in it or see Megan. Her friend then became worried and went upstairs and knocked on Megan's apartment door at 2:30 a.m. Megan answered and claimed to be fine, but the friend noticed that the driver of the car was inside the apartment. Megan's friend would say, she said, "I was right. It was my friend from the club. And I looked down to him and he just nodded his head slowly and didn't say a word. And I didn't speak to him at all either. I said, 'Well, are you sure you're okay?' And she said, 'Yes, I'm fine.'" Less than 2 hours later at 4 a.m. firefighters responded to a report of smoke and fire at the Fox Run apartments. Inside apartment 616, Megan's apartment, they found Megan deceased, an obvious victim of a brutal homicide. Dental records were required to identify her. Her friend and neighbor that saw the man in Megan's apartment right before she was murdered was able to assist in a sketch being made of the suspect. He was a young white man with blonde hair and a baby face, wearing gold-rimmed glasses and a mustache. Since Megan's murder, police have interviewed dozens of people and investigated several suspects. In 2012, a retiring Lufkin police officer stated that they believed they knew who killed Megan but didn't have enough evidence. At one point, the prime suspect was an ex-boyfriend of Megan's named Tim Purvis. Before she died, she had testified about him being abusive, which led to his parole being revoked. He was released from prison about 1 week prior to her murder. However, he had an alibi for that night. Tim died on June 19th after apparently falling off a water tower in Hudson, Texas. Witnesses say he fell off a water tower that had recently been completed and then refused medical treatment and was taken to his home where he later died in his sleep. It's been nearly 22 years since Megan's life was tragically cut short, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Tamara Jewel Keatons was born September 1, 1998, a twin to Tamara. She is of Aboriginal descent and was born to Troy and Lorena Keatons, who later divorced. She was a young white Bear Nations girl and described as loving, smart, and brave. She liked playing Mario Kart on Nintendo and climbing her favorite tree down the block from her house. At the age of 5, Tamara lived at 1834 Ottawa Street in a shabby brown and white two-story with a windowed porch at the front in Regina, Saskatchewan, and Canada. Many of the women and girls who lived or worked in the area were First Nations like Tamara. In the home also lived Tamara's mother, Lorena Kipnis, her mother's common law partner, Dean MacArthur, and her 5 siblings. The Kipnis home was less than a block from the Oksana Center halfway house for federal parolees. The house was also near Salvation Army's Waterston House, a shelter for former inmates and men struggling with addiction and mental health issues. A bar with a notorious reputation called the Earl Hotel was within walking distance of the home. The area was frequented by drug users and sex workers. Lorena and Dean struggled with addiction to drugs, and alcohol and domestic violence was prevalent in the home. Lorena herself grew up in a dysfunctional home with abuse and neglect, which rolled over into her adult life. After running away from White Bear Nation at the age of 14, she lived on the streets until the birth of her first daughter, Summer Wind, at the age of 20. She then had her son, Rain Dance, not long after. Then the twin girls, Tamara and Tamara. Since Lorena and Troy both struggled with substance abuse, their lives were sometimes too troubled and unstable to have the children with them. Once, the girls had arrived to Lorena's in the middle of the night after walking several blocks from their father Troy's home. Crisis and social workers received over 50 reports of abuse, neglect, and drug and alcohol use in the Kipnis home. Sadly, being around illegal activity and violence was also second nature to Tamara and her siblings. In 2004, had served 3 months in prison for brutally beating Lorena while drunk. Social services had been involved with the Kupnis family, and at least once the children were removed. Tamara was briefly cared for by loving foster mom and arrived showing signs of physical and possible sexual abuse. But the foster mom died of whooping cough, and Tamara went back into the system and ultimately back at the home with Lorena and Dean. On July 5, 2004, Tamara and her 5 siblings were watching TV when Tamara went upstairs to go to sleep about 11 p.m. with her 2 brothers aged 3 and 10. Earlier in the night at around 8:30 p.m., Lorena and Dean, both drunk, got into an altercation, which they commonly did, and Dean left the house to go drink with a friend named Russell Sheepskin. Sheepskin often spent drunken nights in the house Tamara lived in, and on this particular night, his girlfriend had kicked him out. Dean and Sheepskin said they left to go buy a dime bag and baby formula. They stopped by the house to drop off the baby formula for Lorena and Dean's 9-month-old baby, then left again to go to a bar. They went to the St. Regis Hotel about 6 blocks away from the house. Sheepskin said he was so drunk he couldn't even remember dropping off the milk. He said he began blacking out at the park across from the hotel. Meanwhile, Lorena went to the store to buy alcohol and returned to tell her oldest child, 11-year-old Summer, to watch the other 5 children while she left to go to her friend's house a block away to drink. Lorena told Summer to keep the doors locked and not open them for anyone, and to call her if anything happened before leaving around midnight. Around 2 a.m. Sheepskin returned to the house, blackout drunk, made something to eat which he later didn't recall, and stated that he saw Tamara, Summer, and Tanis asleep in the living room. He and Dean had been drinking at a bar and then at a park before going their separate ways. When Dean arrived home, Sheepskin was smoking a cigarette on the front porch. A violent altercation then occurred between the 2 men. Dean brutally beat Sheepskin for unknown reasons, resulting in a broken window and blood on the porch. But it is highly speculated the reason for the altercation is because Sheepskin had harmed Tamara, although both men have insisted that the fight was unrelated to Tamara. After the fight, Sheepskin went out the back door, leaving it unlocked to walk to the hospital to get stitches, while Dean said he set off to sleep elsewhere. Dean stated that he had been headed to his aunt's house, which was several blocks away. However, it took him more than 2 hours to get there, and he says this is because he got lost and went to her old house before remembering she had moved. He claimed that he kept blacking out on the way there and had arrived at his aunt's house at 5:30 a.m. and passed out on her couch. Some people speculate that the two men were disposing of her body at this time. Soon after Sheepskin and Dean's altercation, Lorena arrived home after 3 a.m. heavily intoxicated and for some reason entered through a window, then passed out on the couch. She later stated that she saw two of her children, Tanis and Summer, asleep in the living room, but she did not see Tamara. At 8 or 9 in the morning, Lorena woke up and opened the front door to let Summer and Rain out so they could walk to summer camp at a local rec center and let their grandmother Lois inside. Lorena then got back on the couch recovering from a bad hangover. At 10:30 a.m. Lois became concerned that Tamara had not come downstairs for breakfast, so she sent one of the other children to tell her to come eat. But Tamara was nowhere in the house. 8-year-old Rain said he had gone to bed squeezed into the space between the wall and mattresses piled on the floor in an upstairs bedroom. He told his mother he felt Tamara get up at some point and all he could remember was that it was light outside. If this is truly the case, that means Tamara didn't go missing until daylight, hours after Dean and Sheepskin left the house after the altercation. After 2 hours of searching for Tamara, her mother reported her missing. Hundreds of police and volunteers combed the neighborhood for any signs of Tamara. Nearly 13 hours had been unaccounted for between the last time Tamara had been seen by her mother and siblings and the time that she was reported missing. Some officers accompanied trained volunteer search teams and others questioned family members and potential witnesses going door to door, gathering leads or chasing down tips. The RCMP Training Academy provided cadets and members of the public soon began arriving on their own to help. Thousands of tips poured into police hotlines. Lorena and Dean provided authorities with the names of 5 people they thought might be suspects, including a pedophile who had befriended Tamara. Her mother was also suspicious of a woman nicknamed Big Auntie. She didn't know her real name, but she stayed at their house using different aliases and had lied about being pregnant. She apparently left the area around the same time that Tamara did and never returned. Tamara's father, Troy, was notified about his missing daughter and arrived very concerned. He returned to the house one night, weeks later, with a baseball bat and confronted Dane. Troy was ultimately charged with assault, though Dane later said that the police got things misunderstood. Immediately following her disappearance, police set up a command center bus in the parking lot of a nearby church. Much of the neighborhood was filled with overgrown yards, empty houses, and piles of garbage, an easy place to hide a small child. Searchers worked in grids, knocking on doors, inspecting old junk cars and garages, peering under discarded mattresses and piles of wood, and looking down manholes. The area in the neighborhood around Tamara's home reportedly had a foul odor following her disappearance. This is possibly due to the trash pickup being stopped by police while all the bins were checked during the middle of the summer, but some wonder if it was decomposition. Elders had told police they had visions of the child near rocks, water, and trees. However, no search has ever turned up with Tamara. After a week of searching, law enforcement began to interview local sex offenders and viewing CCTV footage from local bus stations and businesses. They determined that the multiple comings and goings from the house that night had not been fully explained. Tamara's 5 siblings were removed by social services due to the instability of the home. On July 19th, Dean was charged with assaulting Sheepskin on the night Tamara went missing and served 6 months in prison for it. A prison guard confessed to the police that she and a former inmate had stolen a van, kidnapped Tamara, and then burned the vehicle after disposing of the girl's body in a ravine on Moskowpatong First Nation land. After a week-long search of the area, the guard admitted she had lied and had just been trying to get her abusive boyfriend locked up again. In 2014, a Reddit user with the name My Secret Is Out posted an eerie hand-drawn map of Moskowpatong tribal land to the Regina subreddit, titled The Location of Tamara Cupney's Check the Wells. The user later stated that the map had been drawn by their late grandmother, who apparently had obtained the map from her sister in Alberta, who had visited someone in prison. The RCMP investigated a series of wells on Muscalpatong land, but turned up no evidence and determined the lady was suffering from Alzheimer's disease. Some believe that Tamara may have wandered from the house that night into the alley behind her house and was kidnapped from the streets. Sheepskin died January 1, 2009. Taking any details about what happened that night, and Dean and Lorena have maintained their innocence in Tamara's disappearance. Lorena has heard many theories about what happened to her daughter. She has repeatedly said that someone stole Tamara because she was so smart. Tamara's family members insist that she was taken from the house by a stranger that night. Some believe Tamara wandered away and was abducted by a driver cruising the area, or that she got lost then crawled in somewhere so small she has never been found. Other theories focus on the adults in the house that night. Some officers will say off the record that they think Tamara is in the dump, but they just couldn't find her due to the mountains of debris. The suggestion she could have had something to do with her daughter's disappearance still pushes Lorena to the point of violence. One night, she was at a bar and some women near Lorena began loudly saying to one another that she had sold her kid for dope. They were saying that she had all those babies so she could just sell them for drugs. Her friend told her not to listen, but Lorena couldn't ignore it and threatened the women. They met at the same bar again the next day, and that time they fought. One of them had a knife and slashed Lorena twice on the back of her arm. Another night, she was once again attacked in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Lorena and Dean remained on and off again for years following Tamara's disappearance. Sadly, she has never been found. No one has been arrested, and as of March 2022, this case remains unsolved. Anisha Catherine Murnane was born on August 12, 1981 in Homer, Alaska, and went by the nickname Duffy. She earned a master's degree in education and worked as a preschool teacher. 38-year-old Duffy had been teaching school in Honduras, Alaska, and a Montessori school in Seattle, Washington, but after being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, she returned to Homer. After moving back, she moved into the Main Tree Supportive House, an apartment complex at 3971 Main Street. Since Duffy didn't drive, she basically walked wherever she wanted to go. On October 17, 2019, she left her apartment at 12:13 p.m. and then can be seen on camera walking east on Pioneer Avenue. She was headed to her 1 o'clock medical appointment at the SVT Health and Wellness Clinic on East End Road, about a mile away. However, she never arrived and has never been heard from again. 2 days later, she was reported missing. Although Duffy's bipolar disorder was stable and she had shown improvement with medication, she was still classified as a vulnerable and dependent adult. Search dogs tracked her scent from her apartment to Pioneer Avenue, where it stopped right past the Thai Cosmic Kitchen in front of Kachumak Bay campus, indicating she may have gotten into a vehicle either willingly or by force. When the Homer Police Department was unable to find her, they hired a special investigator to work on her case solely. Several persons of interest were interviewed over the course of the next 2 years, including a man named Kirby Fellini Calderwood. In April 2022, a call to a tip line gave numerous details about the crime and identified Kirby Calderwood as the killer. Calderwood had previously lived in Holmert before moving to Utah. The tip said he abducted, sexually assaulted, and murdered Duffy. He allegedly knew Duffy due to being employed by a local behavioral health service and having worked at the apartment where she lived. He had actually been a person of interest in the investigation, but that information was never released to the public. The tips turned new facts about the case that had not been publicized and said Calderwood still had Duffy's watch. A look into his past would uncover sexual assault allegations from his first and second wives. He also disclosed to his first wife that he had an addiction to pornography and had intentionally harmed animals from a young age. His second wife claimed that Calderwood told her that he thought he might be a sociopath since he never felt remorse. It also was discovered that he had an extensive history of abuse, violent sexual behavior toward women, and fantasized about torturing and killing someone. Calderwood and his second wife lived in Utah but divorced in 2016. Calderwood then left Utah for Alaska. Once in Alaska, he began dating a local woman, and in 2017, they moved in together. In 2018, the couple moved in with her parents while they searched for an apartment, which they finally found in April 2019. In October 2019, his girlfriend left the country for a trip without him. When she returned on the 21st, she found her new bath towels had been ruined with bleach and that both bathrooms smelled of bleach. She said when she confronted him about it, he got very angry. She also discovered a bag in their garage containing a set of shower clips, a dog collar, a costume corset that she had previously used in theater plays, and 4 of her knitting needles. The corset and knitting needles both had dried blood on them. The tipster was later revealed to be his third wife, and she told the investigator that she confronted Calderwood about the bag and its contents. And once again, he became very angry. Duffy disappeared on October 17, 2019. For days before the woman returned home from her trip. After Duffy's disappearance, Calderwood married for a third time and returned to Utah. When he was interviewed in May 2021, he stated that for 4 or 5 months in or about the fall of 2018, he worked at the Main Tree Supportive House where he met Anisha Murnane. On May 5, 2022, search warrants were conducted on Calderwood's car and at his home on Quincy Avenue in Ogden, where they found a machete and several large knives covered with dried blood. As he was leaving his home, the police performed a traffic stop and arrested him. Upon searching his home, they found Duffy's Timex watch along with her missing person flyer. His wife said Calderwood admitted that he had tortured and killed Duffy, threw her phone in a nearby lake, and disposed of her body in a dumpster. Calderwood then confessed that he had prepared a crawl space in his girlfriend's parents' house to be a torture site since the parents were out of town until December 2019. He had not specifically intended to kill her but was driving around looking for a victim when he saw her. He offered her a ride to her destination saying he had to stop somewhere first to get a phone charger. He then took Duffy to his girlfriend's parents' home, pushed her into the crawl space, and sexually assaulted and killed her. He reportedly disposed of her body by wrapping it in thick plastic trash bags, putting it in a fish tote, and leaving it in a dumpster. It was also discovered that in 2021, he had confessed to his wife about the murder of Duffy. In May 2022, Calderwood was charged with kidnapping, first and second-degree murder, and tampering with physical evidence. In September 2022, a grand jury indicted Calderwood on multiple felony charges, including murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault, carrying a possible sentence of 99 years. Calderwood remains in Utah and is currently awaiting trial. Angel Christine Ormston was born on November 20th, 1974 to parents John and Jackie, and raised in Mentor, Ohio. At the age of 17, she attended Mentor High School and was described as a well-liked person who was fun and outgoing. She loved to drive around town in her 1981 Honda Civic, playing music and hanging out with her friends. She also worked part-time at a burger place at the Great Lakes Mall. On Friday, July 31st, 1992, told her mother she was heading to the burger joint to pick up her paycheck and run some errands. After leaving, her family would never see her again. Angel would often spend the night with friends, and when she didn't arrive home by the next morning, her family wasn't immediately concerned. Her mother, Jackie, wasn't very strict and Angel didn't have rules when it came to checking in with her. Her dad was a long-haul truck driver, so he was often away from home, which would have added to the lack of rules. On Sunday, August 2nd, Angel's older brother drove to the Great Lakes Mall where he saw Angel's car. He went over to it and when he looked inside, he saw Angel's purse and hairbrush lying on the seat. He called their mother, who came down and collected Angel's car. Still thinking Angel was probably with her best friend, Stacy, she called Stacy's house, but there was no answer. This was when Angel's mother began to worry and decided to report her daughter missing. When asked why she waited 2 days to report Angel missing, Jackie said she was under the impression she had to wait 48 hours. Once again, Jackie turned to Angel's best friend, Stacy. The two were inseparable, but on this particular weekend, Stacy had been baking cookies at her sister's house. So when Jackie told her she couldn't find Angel, Stacy was surprised but said she had no idea where Angel could be and hadn't seen her at all that weekend. This was horrifying news to Jackie, who had assumed that her daughter had been with Stacy all along. The police immediately launched a search and examined Angel's car. However, there were no signs of foul play or anything being stolen. Investigators then began to look into the possibility that Angel may have been abducted. Her car was dusted for fingerprints and dozens were found. However, they were all traced back to Angel's family and friends, basically making them all suspects. Her father was ruled out because he was able to provide proof that he was several states away when she disappeared. Angel's co-workers said that she never showed up to get her paycheck. But they surprised detectives when they said they might know who was involved in her disappearance. They told them about one of the male managers who liked to prey on the young female workers. He was often caught lurking nearby when they changed into their working uniforms and was fired for sexual harassment after multiple complaints of inappropriate touching. When investigators looked into the man, they found that he had a record of inappropriate contact with underage girls. The workers explained that the manager had specifically focused on Angel, often showing her extra attention, watching her work, and making sexual comments toward her. They also said he had found every reason to talk and get close to Angel in the cramped kitchen. This information launched him to the top of the suspect list. Investigators quickly tracked him down, but he denied having anything to do with her disappearance. He said he hadn't seen Angel since they worked together and had been nowhere near the Great Lakes Mall on the day she disappeared. In fact, he had been working at another fast food chain at that time and even had the timesheets to prove it. However, investigators didn't let go of the theory that Angel's disappearance had something to do with the fast food restaurant. They once again questioned the employees and manager and uncovered a secret that Angel had been keeping from her family. She had recently been fired for showing up late, and the paycheck she was picking up was going to be her last. Eventually, everyone she worked with was ruled out as a suspect. Since Stacy and Angel were so close, investigators decided to turn their attention back to her. They asked her to come in for questioning, and after a 4-hour-long interview, they were left with a possible suspect, Mark Sarka. Mark was a 19-year-old boy who had just graduated with honors from Mentor High. Stacy would also provide one last piece of information that would break the case wide open. While both she and Angel had a crush on Mark, it was Angel who slept with him over the summer and was pregnant by him when she disappeared. Stacy said that Angel was going to tell Mark about the pregnancy, hoping it would convince him to be in a relationship with her. However, unbeknownst to Angel, Mark had only used her for sex and wanted nothing to do with her, especially since he was heading off to college the following semester. After learning this new information, Polisa immediately hauled Mark in for questioning. However, he denied that he and Angel were together. He said they slept together once, but he hadn't seen her since. He claimed that he had a steady girlfriend who he had been with for the past 2 years. He said that on the night Angel disappeared, he worked until 5 p.m. and then went to the mall to get a gift for his girlfriend. He then said later on he met up with friends for pizza. Investigators checked with Mark's work and confirmed he had been there. They then drove the route to the stores where Mark said he shopped for the gift and found that it was possible to make the trip in the length of time he stated. Finally, they spoke to the friends that Mark claimed he joined up with that night, and they confirmed they had met up at 9 p.m. for pizza and a movie. However, Mark couldn't produce any witnesses for his alleged shopping trip. Also, when investigators questioned employees of the stores that Mark claimed to have entered, nobody recognized him. This led investigators to doubt the shopping part of Mark's story. However, when given a lie detector test, he passed, and due to this and his cooperation, he was ruled out as a suspect. Police then went back to the theory that Angel either ran away or was abducted from her car by another perpetrator. Angel knew her mother wouldn't consent to an abortion, so they thought maybe she had run away. Weeks went by with no leads until a tip came in from a prisoner at the Lake County Detention Center. He claimed that there was a prostitute working in Cleveland, Ohio by the name of Angel that matched Angel Armston's description. A blonde between 17 to 20 years old with a pretty smile who was picked up walking alone on the street. That description fit Angel to a T. The inmate claimed he had seen Angel just before he was arrested, and that she was hired by a man called Pimp Daddy. Detectives contacted Cleveland detectives who confirmed they knew Pimp Daddy and that he ran his business in a 2-story building on the outskirts of town. However, after raiding the building and bringing in the girl by the name of Angel, she refused to talk. So they contacted Jackie and asked her to come to Cleveland to make the identification. Unfortunately, the girl was not Jackie's daughter, and it was another dead end. While it wasn't the angel they were looking for, they were at least able to reunite her with her family. In the meanwhile, Angel's friends and family made flyers and had them strewn throughout the community. They also reached out to businesses, charities, and organizations to scrape together a $10,000 reward for Angel's return. Within a month, thousands of tips were pouring into the Mentor Police Department, but none of them led anywhere. Unfortunately, over time, her case grew cold, but Jackie never gave up hope. As the months passed, one person continued to stand out to investigators, the fiancé of one of Angel's friends. He barely knew Angel, but was also keen on talking to police and reporters about the case. He was known for inserting himself into the investigation and constantly spouted his theories. Police decided to take a closer look at him and theorized that he might have hit on Angel but had his advances rejected and retaliated in return, or maybe he slept with Angel and feared she would tell his fiancé. However, it would lead to another dead end after he provided a solid alibi for the night she disappeared. On December 15, 1992, a local man and his dog were hunting when the dog picked up a scent and headed toward a drainage ditch. That's when the man noticed something wrapped in a sheet with a rope tied around it. As he pulled back the fabric, he spotted what appeared to be a human hand. When investigators arrived, they found a badly decomposed body that had been lying there face down for months, around the same time Angel went missing. Dental records would sadly confirm the remains belonged to Angel Ormston. She had suffered blunt force trauma to her head and had been stabbed twice in her chest. She had been bound with green duct tape that had blue carpet fibers stuck to it. They began looking at homes of friends and family, including Mark Sotka. He had been staying at a house that his family owned around the time Angel went missing, but since that time it had been sold. However, the new family allowed detectives to conduct a search. The new owners had completely remodeled the house except for 2 rooms, including the basement. When investigators went down into the basement, they noticed blue carpet squares on the stouts. So they collected the fibers to compare against the ones found on the duct tape. They also found a section of clothesline in the laundry room cut out, similar to the clothesline that Angel had been bound with. A crime lab tested the items recovered and they matched the items found at the crime scene. Investigators also found spots of blood on the carpets, stairs, and walls along with a bloody thumbprint. Mark Sotka was then arrested for her murder 5 months after she disappeared. However, Mark remained confident that investigators did not have enough evidence to charge him in the case. Meanwhile, they began examining his car and found traces of blood in the trunk that he had tried to clean. They also found a roll of green duct tape. When confronted with the new evidence, he finally admitted that he did something stupid and confessed to Angel's murder. He said he took Angel to his house intending to have sex with her, but when she told him she was pregnant and he was the father, he lost his temper. He insisted Angel have an abortion, but she refused. He punched her several times and she fell down. He ran up the stairs and got a knife out of the garage, came back down, and stabbed her twice in the chest. He was asked if she was alive or dead before he stabbed her, and he replied she was alive because he could see her breathing. Mark then bound her body and dumped her. Afterward, he cleaned up before meeting his friends for pizza and a movie that night. Mark had sat around eating pepperoni pizza and laughing with his friends. All the while, Angel's body was lying in a shallow grave. He then led investigators to a roadside where he threw Angel's car keys and a remote site where he threw the knife. However, the knife was never recovered. In February 1993, pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison. Investigators believe he passed the polygraph due to his lack of remorse. In 2013, her loved ones began the long fight to keep Mark from being paroled. In June 2013, he had his first hearing before the Ohio Parole Board. Angel's family and friends fought to ensure he was not released from Grafton Correctional Institution and his parole was denied. However, this month, July 2023, after serving 30 years, he will be eligible for parole again. Her loved ones are asking the community to sign the petition on change.org. Also, if you're interested, you can submit a letter to justiceforangelormston@gmail.com and they will submit it to the parole board. Dana Laskowski was born on February 23, 1965 and lived in Puyallup, Washington. At the age of 36, Dana was recently separated from her husband and became a single mother to her 9-year-old triplet daughters. Those who knew her well said she loved life and especially loved being a mom. In 2001, Dana was employed as a nanny, but on August 31st, she failed to show up for work, and the couple she worked for made numerous attempts to contact her. This was so out of character for her, they called the police and requested a welfare check. Officers made their way into Dana's home through an unlocked back door and made a shocking discovery. Dana was found lying face down on the couch, strangled to death, with one arm twisted behind her back. Dana's ex-husband, Stan, who she was on bitter terms with, immediately became a suspect. However, he told investigators that he took their daughters camping the night of the murder and provided a gas receipt to corroborate his alibi and was subsequently ruled out as a suspect. Investigators then turned to others in her life, including a man named Michael in Vancouver, Canada, whom Dana had been dating. They were on the verge of a breakup and phone records proved they spoke the night of her death. Michael told investigators Dana seemed to tense and didn't say "I love you" back. After their phone call, he decided to drive to Puyallup and visit her to discuss their relationship, but he was stopped at the border and not allowed entry into Canada. Border Patrol records corroborated Michael's alibi, and he too was ruled out as a suspect. The next suspect was a man named Patrick who installed Dana's cable at her new house. He became obsessed with her and began stalking her not long before her death, leaving flowers and strange poems on her porch. In one letter, Patrick wrote that he was watching Dana and mentioned things only someone with access to her home would know. Dana told her aunt and her employer that if anything ever happened to her, to look at Patrick. However, Patrick insisted that he had nothing to do with Dana's death and even offered up a sample of his DNA. He claimed he was working at the time of the murder, after which he went out for drinks with friends. Patrick's employer and friends corroborated his alibi and ruled him out. Investigators then began looking at the memorial book from Dana's funeral, hoping the killer had left a message. What they found broke the case wide open. 1 month after the murder, Dana's 17-year-old niece, Amanda, left a cryptic message in a memorial book in her honor. It read, "I'm so sorry I wasn't a better niece for you. 34 days clean and sober. It's all for you." There was something off about Amanda's post. She appeared remorseful over Dana's death and possibly knew something investigators didn't. Amanda had a tumultuous relationship with her parents and Dana was like a second mom to her, often letting her stay with her. Dana even unlocked the back door to her house so that Amanda and her best friend, 17-year-old Emily Lonberg, could sleep over or shower if they needed to. Amanda and Emily were both heavy drug users, and they hung out with a troubled group of friends who called themselves the Park Rats. Amanda was then called in for questioning and told investigators that she had run into a friend named Blaine before Dana's murder. She said he made a pass at her, but she rejected him, so she theorized that he might have murdered Dana out of revenge. Since Blaine lived in a different state, the detective reached out to one of his young informants who dropped a bombshell. He said Blaine didn't kill Dana. Amanda's best friend Emily Lonborg did. 2 other Park Rats members also told the police that Emily killed Dana and bragged about it. At first, investigators were baffled at the idea that a petite girl standing at 5 feet 2 inches would have been strong enough to strangle someone to death. But it turned out that Emily was into wrestling and weightlifting. She was so strong, she was nicknamed the Mutant. Several friends claimed her go-to move was to twist one arm behind someone's back, the same position Dana had been found in. Investigators attempted to question Emily, but she was very uncooperative and couldn't provide a solid alibi. They obtained a search warrant for her home and found a diary that included a bucket list of things she wanted to accomplish. Number 9 on the list read, "Kill someone and get away with it." In another entry written after an argument with Amanda, Emily wrote that she could strangle Amanda just like her aunt. Just as surprising, investigators found a black t-shirt belonging to Dana in Emily's room and discovered that she was wearing it in photos taken at her funeral. Amanda was questioned again, and this time she admitted that Emily had murdered her aunt. She said they walked into Dana's home through the unlocked back door high on drugs. They asked her for money to buy more drugs, but she refused and told them to leave. Dana placed her hand on Emily's shoulder to guide her to the door. That's when Emily put Dana in a headlock, twisted her arm behind her back and pushed her face into the couch. Amanda claimed she turned away because she did not want to get involved, at which point she heard gurgling followed by the sound of a crack. After Dana died, the two robbed her and left. On March 3, 2003, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She was tried as an adult and pleaded not guilty. Prosecutors offered Amanda immunity if she testified against Emily at the trial. However, they were concerned that she would change her mind at the last second. They also feared that the jury would not convict Emily based purely on circumstantial evidence and that she would walk free. They ultimately offered her a plea deal for 6.5 years, and she accepted. While Dana's family was relieved that some justice was reached, they were disappointed at how little time Emily served after killing Dana. Emily was released from prison in 2009 after only serving 5 years and has since changed her name to Emily Seabox. She then married a man named Darren Wickman, and the two had children together before divorcing in 2013. Talaba Islam was born on November 18, 1995 in Tarrant County, Texas. Talaba was the youngest and tallest of 3 sisters and was said to have a very infectious smile. At the age of 20, Talaba was living in Fort Worth, Texas with her boyfriend, Chris Reveley, and their 3-month-old son. Chris was allegedly abusive toward Talaba, and he had even been investigated for an assault against her when she was 9 months pregnant. On top of being abusive, Talaba's family said he was also allegedly very manipulative and had a history of violence against other women. On January 16, 2006, Talaba allegedly brought their infant son to visit Reveley, his mother's home, at 1916 Bay Oaks Court in Fort Worth. After that, she was never seen again. A couple of days later, he told her family that after an argument, she left their infant with him, got into an SUV with someone he didn't know, and never returned. He then gave their son to Talaba's family, stating that he couldn't care for him. 5 days after her disappearance, he reported her missing. 10 years later, on October 10, 2016, Tiffany Johnson had just broken up with Reveley and was making him gather his belongings from her apartment. Inside the apartment was Tiffany's twin brother Asher, along with 2 other people. 25-year-old Tiffany was last seen arguing with Reveley outside of her apartment building. After that, she was never seen again. When Reveley re-entered her apartment, Asher asked him where his sister was, and he replied that she jumped into another car and drove off. Asher, suspecting something was wrong, went downstairs to check on her and noticed Reveley's car backed up to the apartment with the trunk open. Upon noticing Asher, he sped off. When authorities arrived, they found Tiffany's phone, car keys, and one of her socks in the parking lot. They also searched Ravel's mother's home and found the tank top that Tiffany was wearing the night she vanished. Ravel was then arrested and charged with kidnapping, and in August 2019, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. At his sentencing hearing, Ravel's sister took the stand and testified that she was sitting in her bedroom at her parents' house while Chris, Talaba, and their baby were in his bedroom nearby. They were arguing in his room when his sister heard Talaba yell, "Broke my jaw." After that, she was never heard from again. On March 2, 2023, 17 years after her disappearance, Talaba's remains were found near railroad tracks in the 900 block of South Hughes Avenue in Fort Worth. Unfortunately, they were unable to determine her cause and manner of death. At this time, the police haven't identified Reveal as a suspect and said there's no hard evidence to link him to her case. As of July 2023, Tiffany's body has never been found. Virginia Jenny Hannon was born on August 12, 1924 in Boston, Massachusetts. At the age of 59, Jenny was a widow living alone at 57 West Street in Pembroke, Massachusetts, and worked as a cook in the cafeteria of Bryantville Elementary School. She was described as a good person who was great with the kids. While she didn't have any children of her own, she still loved the little ones she fed each day. Those who knew her said she loved tending to stray animals and baking treats for the children in the neighborhood. She also loved bingo and was known to put ice in her beer. They said she was just an overly fun person to be around. Jeannie also took care of her father-in-law, who lived 2 doors down from her own home. On Saturday, February 11, 1984, Jeannie rode 4 miles southwest to the nearby town of Hanson to attend evening mass with her friend Dolly Harmouth. After church, the two women drove 7 miles south to Halifax, where they had dinner at BR's restaurant. Afterward, Dolly dropped Jeannie off at her home around 7:30 p.m., and this was the last time she was ever seen alive. On Monday, February 13th, her father-in-law's housekeeper stopped by Jeannie's house to get a key to her father-in-law's home. Instead, she found Jeannie beaten, stabbed, and strangled to death with a sheet pulled over her. Unfortunately, with little to no leads, the murder would go unsolved for the next 40 years. In May 2018, prosecutors began working with forensic experts at the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab to test evidence for DNA. In January 2019, investigators reanalyzed the evidence and discovered all of the DNA evidence from the crime scene belonged to one unknown man, but they were unable to identify the suspect. Prosecutors reached out to two companies, Identifinders International and Parbon Nanolabs, to conduct genetic genealogy testing. While Identifinders was able to provide two possible last names for the suspect, investigators didn't actually have a suspect. Finally, in 2020, detectives would get a break from an unlikely source. A person came forward and said that a year ago, his friend Jesse Alward confessed to murdering a woman in Pembroke when he was 22 years old. Alward died on February 3, 2020, at the age of 58, and his friend called the authorities with the information the very next day. After receiving the tip, police obtained a warrant for the blood of Alward, whose body was still at Brockton Hospital to be tested against the DNA they had. Those results proved that Al Ward, who was never on the investigators, was definitely Ginny's killer. Al Ward's obituary said he was known for having a unique personality and at some point owned his own paving and seal coating business. It also said he was creative with building, generous to homeless people, intelligent and independent, and enjoyed working on patent development. Unfortunately, Al Ward never provided a motive in the case. One theory is he learned about Jeannie's inheritance and entered her home looking for money and murdered her in the process. Supposedly, it was widely known around town about Jeannie's recent inheritance. However, there is no evidence to support this theory.